Campaigners in Ireland are calling for a referendum on the Irish blasphemy law after an investigation into Stephen Fry over comments that he made on a TV show in Ireland. Police looked into a claim that the comedian uttered blasphemous remarks, but the case was dropped days later. Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams, among others, has demanded a vote to allow Stephen Fry or anyone else to air their views on God without fear of criminal charges. The law against blasphemy was introduced in 2009, and it carries a maximum penalty of a fine of €25,000, about £22,000. John Hamill is from the National Executive of Atheist Ireland, which wants a referendum into whether or not this law should be struck down. It seems unusual for a country to be introducing a law on blasphemy as recently as 2009, and he told me what the trigger for it was.
The trigger was an update to our Defamation Act, and we have a constitutional requirement that the government of the day has to have a crime on the statute book of blasphemy. So when we updated the Defamation Act in 2009, the then government had the option of either holding a referendum to repeal the constitutional provision for blasphemy, or else introducing the crime of blasphemy and updating that on the statute book. And from the Atheist Ireland side, we've been campaigning for a referendum on this topic, but unfortunately at the time we had an economic crisis in the country, and the IMF was here, as I recall, so the idea of spending millions of euros on a referendum wasn't too palatable to the government of the day.
Well, you've got a huge bonus now from Stephen Fry and this lone gentleman who objected to him, haven't you? I mean, you couldn't ask for anything better.
Yes, we were delighted to see the news. There's no better way to highlight how absurd and risible the law itself is than to have a case investigated by our police. And in fact, the result of the case in terms of the announcement that the police made from Atheist Ireland's perspective, the announcement by the police in terms of how the case is now closed is even more worrying than the law itself. So when the law itself came in, one of the arguments that we had against it was that it incentivized religious outrage. So if you look at the text of the law, the test to determine whether or not someone has committed the crime of blasphemy is not a list of deities that you cannot offend. It's not a list of mean things that you cannot say about one god or another. It's that a substantial number of people have become outraged. And what the police have announced is that they were unable to find a sufficiently large number of people who were outraged. Now,
all right, so there's one bloke who actually wrote in about it. He wasn't enough, was he?
Well, that's right. There was one bloke in Ennis, County Clare, who went into his local Garda station and made a complaint. And specifically, I mean, some of your listeners may recall high-profile cases like the Danish cartoons. And after that, there were widespread protests across the world. There was a number of Danish embassies that were destroyed. And what the law in Ireland therefore says is, if you react to a blasphemy like that, if you become outraged in large numbers, then you may procure a prosecution for blasphemy. But if you're a tolerant person who has a more proportionate response, then blasphemy cannot be prosecuted. So in that sense, we believe the law is incentivizing people in precisely the wrong direction.
Yeah, it's beginning to sound a bit tricky, isn't it, for multicultural Ireland? So have you now got TDs who are actually on side? Are they beginning to get the wind up about the possible abuse of this law?
Indeed, I mean, it's actually difficult to find a TD who is in favour of the law, but we just need to gather enough political will and political momentum to arrange a referendum. It's interesting you mentioned the TDs, Rod, because we have an associated development here this week in Ireland, whereby our Parliament has voted to make a mandatory Christian prayer at the start of each session of the Parliament. So all of our TDs must stand and recite a Christian prayer, or else they can be sanctioned by the Speaker. A number of TDs actually refused to stand this week and held up a sign calling for the separation of church and state instead. So yeah, and in some senses, the issues are linked. You know, we have a background mood music in Ireland of Roman Catholic religiosity. So yes, that mood music has a number of different effects.
It's not very interesting, because you thought, you know, that Ireland's kind of fealty, if you like, to the Roman Catholic Church was wavering a bit. But you're saying that they're actually introducing new laws based on Catholicism.
Indeed, well, I think it's one area where the establishment and both the elected and the permanent governments, I think, have quite a different perspective from the population. As you say, I mean, the broad population is substantially moving away from Catholicism. If you look at things like mass attendance rates, they're very low. If you look at things like weddings, more than half of all weddings in the country are now non-religious weddings. So yeah, the population is becoming increasingly diverse, increasingly pluralist, increasingly non-religious, but the institutional church still wields quite a lot of power among the establishment, and that's the reason, I think, why we see the persistence of some of this religious mood music within the statute book.
And just one last thought. Richard Dawkins, the author of The God Delusion, among other things, says he's going to be in the National Concert Hall in Dublin on the 12th of June, inviting arrest for blasphemy. So will you be along?
I have bought my tickets already, Rod. Yes, indeed. I'm very much looking forward to it. I doubt actually that Richard will get his collar felt on that particular occasion, but maybe we can ask Richard to offer an answer to the question that Stephen Fry asked that got him into so much trouble. And the question was, if God is all powerful and God is all loving, why are there children who have bone cancer? And while everyone has been getting very upset about the statute book, I haven't seen anyone offer a coherent answer to that question.
A proper answer. Well, I mean, religious people have been struggling with that for generations and will continue to do so, I'm sure.
Indeed.
And that was from Atheist Ireland. That was John Hamill. And I don't think you'll put your answers on a postcard to why do bad things happen to good people. But it's always, it gets a party going. You know what I mean? It's a good thing to discuss. It's